She fought for every breath. But he wasn't done yet. He stepped back, took a moment and then attacked again. She knew it was over. This wasn't the start of a nightmare. It was a Monday morning in a small Florida town. A robbery gone wrong? Or something much darker? The crime that would echo in the courts for nearly 4 decades had already begun its deadly path. But the story didn't end with the violence. It wasn't over when the struggle stopped. It lingered, stretching through legal battles, appeals, and a fight for survival that dragged on far too long. What happened that day? What kind of person is capable of such actions? And what does it take for a case like this to finally reach its conclusion? Stay with us as we dive into a case that raises questions about the true meaning of justice. If you're curious to know more about how this story unfolds, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what comes next. On the morning of August 15, 1988, in Palatka, Florida, Minnie Ruth McCullum started her shift at the Handyway convenience store. What seemed like an ordinary day at work quickly turned into something far from routine. The store, a place she managed daily, would become the backdrop for a crime that would shake the community. Richard Barry Randolph, a former employee of the store, entered that morning with an intent to rob the place. What seemed like a simple theft quickly escalated into a confrontation between him and McCullum. As soon as she realized he was there for more than just a quick purchase, McCullum took action. She confronted Randolph in an attempt to prevent the crime, but the situation soon spiraled out of her control. Randolph's actions became increasingly desperate. In that brief moment, what started as a simple robbery attempt transformed into an act that would forever alter both of their lives. McCullum, knowing the risk she faced, fought back, but the situation was too far gone. After the brief confrontation, Randolph fled the scene, taking McCullum's car and leaving her behind. McCullum, though gravely injured, managed to contact the authorities. However, her condition was worsening, and her chances of survival were slim. The store, once a simple place of work, was now the scene of a crime that would haunt the community for years. As Randolph sped away in the stolen vehicle, the situation quickly drew attention. 3 women who had been in the store during the incident witnessed his actions. They saw him leave the scene and, realizing something wasn't right, immediately contacted the authorities. Their quick thinking and sharp observation played a crucial role in bringing Randolph to justice. One of the women took note of the vehicle's description, helping the police connect Randolph to the crime. The police response was swift. Within hours, they located McCullum's abandoned car. While it was clear that the crime had been committed, they still lacked solid evidence. But those 3 women, whose observations would prove critical, had already given the authorities a valuable lead. They quickly identified Randolph as the man they had seen leaving the store. Following this, investigators moved quickly, retracing Randolph's steps. The stolen car, discarded near a local highway, provided the police with even more evidence. Randolph's connection to the crime was undeniable. He had been inside the store before, and witnesses had already provided a clear description of the suspect. Soon after, Randolph was found in Jacksonville, attempting to cash stolen lottery tickets. His capture was swift. What followed was a confession that provided chilling details about the events of that morning. Randolph admitted to trying to steal from the store and even explained how he had stolen McCullum's car in an attempt to escape the scene. As the investigation progressed, new evidence emerged that helped to piece together what happened. But the ultimate question remained: why had Randolph committed such an act? Was it a crime of desperation, or was there something more to it? His actions raised many questions, but the answers would take time to unfold. With Randolph now in custody, the case was just beginning. The key witnesses, Randolph's own admission of guilt, and the mounting evidence all pointed toward him as the perpetrator. The focus was now on understanding his motivations and the long legal journey ahead. What would you have done if you were a witness to this crime? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. In the hours following Minnie Ruth McCullum's attack, law enforcement immediately launched an investigation into what had transpired inside the Handyway convenience store. The first breakthrough came from 3 women who had been inside the store during the robbery. They witnessed Randolph leaving the scene in a hurry and immediately contacted authorities, providing vital information that helped investigators make quick headway. As police officers responded to the scene, they began examining the area and quickly noticed Randolph's connection to the crime. He had been a former employee at the store, and his familiarity with the layout gave him an advantage during the robbery attempt. It wasn't long before they started tracking Randolph's movements after the incident, and a clearer picture began to form. The stolen vehicle was quickly located, abandoned a short distance from the scene, and it contained vital evidence. Bloodied clothing was found near the vehicle, which further connected Randolph to the crime. Investigators knew that this was just the start. They needed more concrete evidence to confirm his role in the attack on McCollum. The next breakthrough came when Randolph was located in Jacksonville, where he was trying to cash in stolen lottery tickets, a move that would lead to his arrest. Officers took him into custody, and he was brought in for questioning. It was at this point that Randolph confessed to the crime, providing authorities with a detailed account of the events that unfolded in the store that morning. In his confession, Randolph explained that he entered the store with the intent to rob it. However, when McCollum confronted him, the situation escalated quickly. He explained how he had tried to overpower her and flee the scene with the stolen car. His detailed account matched the evidence recovered at the scene, including the stolen car and the bloodied clothing. With this confession in hand, investigators were able to close the case against Randolph. The physical evidence, combined with eyewitness accounts and Randolph's own admission of guilt, painted a clear picture of his involvement in the crime. As the investigation moved forward, the question of why Randolph committed the crime lingered. Was it purely financial desperation, or was there something deeper that led him to make such a decision? As the case progressed, Randolph's criminal history and his previous connection to the store became more significant. The investigation highlighted his troubled past and raised further questions about what motivated him to commit such a violent act. But at the heart of the case remained one undeniable truth: Randolph was responsible for McCollum's suffering. The police had gathered enough evidence to move forward with the case, but the true motives behind the crime remained a mystery. Randolph's confession had provided much-needed clarity, but it raised new questions about his state of mind and what drove him to make the choices he did. Do you think a confession alone is enough for conviction? Share your thoughts below. The courtroom was charged with tension as the trial of Richard Barry Randolph began. The case, one that had already left its mark on the community, now faced the scrutiny of the law. Randolph stood accused of first-degree murder, armed robbery, and sexual assault. The stakes were high, not only for Randolph but for the larger questions it raised about justice and punishment. The defense team sought to explain Randolph's actions by turning to his troubled past. They argued that Randolph's mental health issues, stemming from years of substance abuse and a chaotic childhood, played a central role in his decision to commit the crime. They painted a picture of a man who had struggled with addiction to crack cocaine, which, they argued, impaired his ability to think rationally. Randolph's background was used as a critical piece of his defense strategy, with his lawyers asserting that his addiction and personal history were factors that should mitigate his responsibility. However, the prosecution presented a starkly different view. They focused on the brutality of the crime and the deliberate nature of Randolph's actions. Despite any challenges Randolph may have faced, the prosecution argued, there was no excuse for his behavior. They highlighted the calculated steps he took: his decision to rob the store, the violent confrontation with McCollum, and his escape in her stolen vehicle. The prosecution underscored that these actions showed clear intent and awareness of his wrongdoing. The jury deliberated, weighed the arguments, and in the end, they returned with a death penalty recommendation. The decision was not unanimous, but the majority felt that the severity of the crime, combined with Randolph's history of violent behavior, warranted such a sentence. The question now was whether the judge would agree with the jury's recommendation. Judge Robert Perry, who had presided over the case, made the final decision. In his ruling, he considered both the aggravating and mitigating factors. The aggravating factors were clear: the brutality of the crime, the sexual assault that took place during the robbery, and Randolph's actions after the crime, including his attempt to escape. But the defense had presented evidence of Randolph's troubled history, citing mental health issues, substance abuse, and a history of trauma as mitigating factors. Ultimately, the judge followed the jury's recommendation and sentenced Randolph to death. The ruling sparked a wave of debate and controversy. Many felt that the crime's severity warranted such a punishment, while others believed that Randolph's troubled past should have led to a less severe sentence. The trial not only highlighted the nature of Randolph's actions but also raised broader questions about the death penalty and the role of mental health in the justice system. In the days following the verdict, Randolph's defense team filed appeals, continuing to argue that his mental health issues and troubled background should be given greater weight in the sentencing phase. But with each legal motion, the focus remained the same. Was justice truly being served, or was the system failing to consider the full context of Randolph's life? This legal battle, now part of a larger conversation about punishment and redemption, would continue to unfold. But for now, Randolph's fate was sealed by the decision of the court. His case was no longer just about one man. It had become a symbol of the legal and moral complexities that define the fight for justice. Do you think mental illness or a troubled past should lessen the severity of a crime? Let us know what you think in the comments. After Richard Barry Randolph was sentenced to death, his life on death row began, marking the start of a long and complex journey through the American judicial system. What followed was not just about serving his sentence. It was a prolonged battle for his life, stretching over 37 years of appeals, legal challenges, and questions about redemption and justice. Randolph's legal journey began immediately after his conviction. His defense team worked tirelessly to find grounds for an appeal, focusing on his mental health and troubled past. Throughout the years, the defense argued that Randolph's issues with substance abuse, including his addiction to crack cocaine, had significantly impacted his actions. They pointed to his childhood trauma, which they claimed had shaped his behavior, and pushed for psychological assessments to be central in the appeal process. While the defense fought to reduce his sentence, Randolph's time in prison also brought about a significant personal transformation. In an effort to turn his life around, Randolph converted to Islam, a step that many believed was a genuine part of his rehabilitation. According to those who worked with him in prison, Randolph exhibited good behavior and made strides in his personal growth, expressing remorse for the crime he had committed. Over the years, he claimed to have changed, emphasizing his desire for redemption. Despite these claims of personal transformation, Randolph's case was far from resolved. His defense team continued to push for reduced sentencing based on his mental health and the years he had spent behind bars. But with each appeal, there was resistance from the prosecution. They argued that the crime was so severe that no amount of rehabilitation could change the gravity of Randolph's actions. In the mid-2000s, Randolph's case reached higher courts as new arguments about his mental health and capacity to change were introduced. These legal challenges added years to his time on death row, with each ruling further complicating his path. But throughout these years, the question of whether Randolph's change in prison could or should influence his sentence remained central. Finally, in 2025, after decades of appeals, the courts made their final ruling. Randolph's appeals were rejected. The years of legal battles came to a dramatic end, and the decision was made to carry out his execution. Despite his claims of redemption and his efforts to reform, the court maintained that the severity of his crime and his long-standing history of criminal behavior could not be ignored. After 37 years of legal delays, his fate was sealed. Randolph's case sparked debate across the nation. Supporters of the death penalty argued that the punishment was justified due to the nature of his crime and the aggravating factors that had emerged during his trial. Those who opposed capital punishment, on the other hand, pointed to Randolph's mental health and his personal transformation as evidence that the system had failed to offer him a fair second chance. In the final moments before his execution, Randolph maintained his innocence and his feelings of remorse. He had spent his time in prison attempting to demonstrate that he was not the same person who had committed the violent crime so many years ago. Yet for many, his actions still spoke louder than any words of repentance. The execution on November 20, 2025, brought closure to a case that had taken decades to reach its final resolution. But for many, the question remained: was justice truly served, or had the system failed to account for the complexities of Randolph's life? The case of Richard Barry Randolph would continue to raise questions about the balance between punishment and redemption, the role of mental illness in criminal behavior, and whether the death penalty could ever truly be fair in a system that constantly struggles with questions of rehabilitation and justice. Do you think someone who has spent decades in prison for their crime should get a second chance? Share your thoughts below. On November 20, 2025, after decades of legal proceedings, Richard Barry Randolph's time on death row finally came to an end. The legal battles, appeals, and claims of redemption had all led to this day, the moment when the state would carry out its sentence. Randolph, convicted of first-degree murder, armed robbery, and sexual assault, was about to face the final consequence for his crime. That morning, Randolph was given the customary last meal, but he chose not to partake. His decision to decline the meal added a quiet finality to the day's events. It was a small yet significant gesture. He made no public statement, leaving no final words before what would soon unfold. The execution process proceeded as per the state's legal procedures. Randolph was led to the death chamber, where the execution was to take place. The room, cold and sterile, was designed for such moments, though it could never strip away the emotional weight that came with carrying out such a sentence. Randolph, calm and composed, did not resist. His acceptance of what was to come seemed to reflect years of legal delays and personal reflection. For McCollum's family, this moment of finality marked a painful conclusion to a chapter that had dragged on for 37 years. There was a sense of closure for some, a chance to finally move forward after years of waiting. But for others, the emotions were mixed. Despite the passage of time, the grief of losing McCollum that day in 1988 lingered, and the execution, while providing finality, did not erase the deep emotional scars left by the crime. The public's reaction was equally divided. For those who supported capital punishment, this was the outcome they had expected. Justice served for a crime that had devastated the victim's family and shocked the community. For those opposed to the death penalty, Randolph's execution was a reminder of the flaws within the system. Critics pointed to his conversion to Islam, his good behavior in prison, and the lengthy period of incarceration he had already endured. They questioned whether such an extreme measure was necessary, especially after so many years spent behind bars. Public opinion on the death penalty in the United States remains deeply split, and Randolph's case did nothing to resolve the debate. To some, the execution represented a sense of justice. To others, it symbolized a broken system that often failed to consider the complexity of a person's journey. As Randolph's final moments passed, the questions about his actions, his redemption, and his fate lingered. Was this truly justice, or did the system fail to account for the changes he claimed to have made? Did the years on death row serve as enough of a reflection of his life's mistakes? Or was his punishment too final for someone who had spent so much time in prison attempting to change? The execution marked the end of Randolph's life, but the debate over his case would continue long after. For McCollum's family, there was no sense of celebration in this moment, only the hope that this final act might bring them a small amount of peace. And for the public, Randolph's death was one more chapter in the ongoing discussion about the effectiveness and morality of the death penalty. Was this truly justice or a continuation of a flawed system? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The case of Richard Barry Randolph raises profound questions about the role of justice and the death penalty in modern society. His execution, following years of legal challenges and personal transformation, was not the end of the debate but rather a continuation of an ongoing conversation about the effectiveness of capital punishment and its moral implications. Randolph's execution on November 20, 2025, marked the conclusion of a case that had stretched over 3 decades. While some believed that the death penalty served as a necessary consequence for a man who had committed such serious crimes, others saw his time on death row, 37 years of reflection, remorse, and rehabilitation, as a reason to reconsider the harshness of his sentence. The question of whether justice was served is not easily answered. The public reaction was split. For those who supported the death penalty, Randolph's execution was seen as a final measure of justice for the violence he had committed. His crime had devastated McCullum's family and shocked the local community. For them, the conclusion of this case brought closure. However, others pointed to the transformative years Randolph spent in prison. His conversion to Islam, his good behavior, and his statements of remorse were cited as evidence that the man he was in 2025 was far different from the man who committed the crime in 1988. Could someone who had spent decades behind bars, making efforts to change, deserve a second chance? Or was it too late for him to be judged by a different standard? The case also sparked broader discussions about the death penalty and the criminal justice system. Many began to question whether the system's reliance on capital punishment truly reflected justice, especially in cases where the convicted person had shown signs of change. Was the execution of Randolph a necessary act, or was it a continuation of a flawed system, one that fails to fully account for the complexities of a person's life and the potential for personal growth? As Randolph's story ended with his execution, it became part of a much larger conversation about the morality of the death penalty in the United States. The case highlighted the ongoing debate over capital punishment and the reform of the justice system. Can a system that has the power to take a life truly be considered fair? And how do we balance the need for justice with the desire for redemption? The legacy of Randolph's case will continue to affect future discussions about the death penalty. For McCullum's family, the execution may have marked a final step in their long journey, but the broader conversation about the effectiveness and fairness of capital punishment will continue. For society as a whole, the case left a lasting imprint, raising important questions about punishment, reform, and the meaning of justice. If you found this case as thought-provoking as we did, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more true crime documentaries. Like and share this video to spread awareness about the justice system.